Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we're going to have somebody on the show today who is going to make you feel uncomfortable. And you know what? It's a good thing. Bill Eckstrom was born in Omaha, Nebraska, but calls Valley, Nebraska home, where he moved in his early teens and had a high school graduating class of 55 students. As a self-proclaimed terrible student, Bill would have been labeled behaviorally disordered by today's standards. He was kicked out of school in the 7th grade with a recommendation from the principal that he be expelled from the entire district. Had it not been for 2 amazingly tolerant parents and a couple of athletic coaches, Bill would likely have taken a much different path, one far more self-destructive. He grew up with 2 brothers and spent most of his young life on a field with a ball or in a field with his oldest brother pursuing wild game. Bill began his professional career in 100% commission insurance sales, going against his father's advice that it was the most prudent job to get and be with a big company instead, which he believed offered the most secure future. Ironically, when Bill did pursue that path later in his career, he learned quickly that today's world was not the same as his father had experienced. Bill was fired from his job as Senior Vice President of Business Development for a publicly traded company. That significant life-altering event, however, was the catalyst to Bill's future achievements. Now, Bill is the founder and CEO of the Excel Institute, the world's first and only organization to measure and quantify leadership effectiveness. His company works in a variety of settings, helping coaches, leaders in the world of business, athletics, and education. Bill, along with his co-author, Sarah Worth, are the authors of the best-selling book, The Coaching Effect. The book focuses on what great leaders do to behave more like a high-growth coach and lead teams that produce and perform at much higher levels. The book's body of work is based on Bill's company's research, which measured over 100,000 coaching interactions in the workplace. In his spare time, Bill is involved with therapy dog work. He and his Labrador Aspen work together at senior living homes, children's hospitals, colleges, athletic teams, and anywhere the presence of Aspen's wagging tail and a soft soul can bring a smile. Bill and his wonderful wife have been married for 35 years and live in Lincoln, Nebraska. They have 3 children, ages 23, 29, and 31, spread all across the country, living in New York City, Fort Collins, Colorado, and Hawaii. The only benefit of having them so far away is that they live in beautiful places to visit. Bill Eckstrom, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
Jim, I will do my best, and thank you for having me today.
Well, I'm glad you're here. Now, I've given my legion a little bit about you, but can you share what your current passion is so that we can get to know you even better?
My current passion is working with young men and women. That's always been a passion that continues. And right now it's really adapting a lot of what we do from business to athletics and education. So spending a lot of time expanding our footprint that way.
Well, and as you say that, I had the opportunity of reviewing your TED Talk, and we'll put a link to that on your show notes page at fastleader.net/Bill Eckstrom. So people can get, a greater understanding of, how you get to that point, because quite frankly, how you do it is quite unorthodox and it's had some significant impact. But in the book, before we get into the depth of our discussion, I think it's important and essential that we establish the difference between, a manager, a trainer, a mentor, and a coach. So if you could help us understand the very important distinctions between these roles.
Sure. And that's really a good question, Jim. let's start with manager, the most commonly used term. And I'll even throw leader in coming up, I'll add leader to that mix as well. But manager, as we say in the book, The Coaching Effect, it's a very archaic term. The science and study of management really came about in the industrial era in our country. And managers were known for doing, having predictable inputs and driving predictable outcomes. And as you learned from the TED Talk and how you and I were discussing before the program began, growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. That's not what management's about. Management's about driving predictability, and that's what creates comfort. So it's the antithesis. So managers have nothing to do with motivation. When we use that, they have nothing to do with discretionary effort. And when we use that term manager, people without even knowing it are asking people to limit performance of teams. That's by nature, that's what that role is supposed to do.
Well, the unfortunate side of that is when you start talking about in today's world and the changing and the evolution, and it is no longer a production where I'm putting widgets together down a line.
Very well said. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's now we're asking people to do things that they've never been developed for, and that's really what the book is all about. But to put things in proper context around the customer and the employee experience, what is the difference in high performance coaching and coaching environments and coaching practices mean versus just the average?
We spent a lot of time trying to figure that out as well, by the way. And so what we were able to do with our research is we were able to go across many, many hundreds of companies throughout the world. And it's really easy to focus on, as a baseline in your research, sales departments, because they measure everything, right? And there's always numbers attached to highs and lows and everywhere in between. And so what we were able to do is we took the top 20% of leaders within sales departments and across all different companies. And so we were able to normalize that. And then we went back, because we had so much data and research on all of them, we were able to go back and research what they did well, what they did differently. So we separate the top 20% versus the bottom 80. Now, we could talk about perhaps elite, the top 3 to 5%, but there wasn't a huge difference within the top 20%. And here's what's really kind of interesting, Jim. Between the top 20 and bottom 80, the gap is relatively small, meaning that the top 20% does 28% what we call more of the high growth coaching activities. They coach with 17% better quality. Those aren't huge separations. They're statistically significant, but they're not huge. And really what we're seeing is the difference between the top 20%, which is what we'll refer to as great, and everyone else is not that big. But what it takes to close that gap is really significant, because it involves a lot of behavior change. So to now to answer that question specifically, so what the top 20% are doing, they do more coaching, and we measure that. They do it better quality. We measure that. The result is lower turnover, higher discretionary effort. When we compare it with engagement results, engagement increases. So the results are really, quite frankly, astronomical. And in terms of dollar and cents, if I lead a team of salespeople, if I'm a top 20%er, my team averages $4.3 million more revenue.
Well, as you're saying that, and you talk about all this measurement, I mean, the same thing happens in a contact center environment where I spend most of my days, measured like you wouldn't believe. And for me, when you start talking about those differences and those gaps, I mean, when you start getting, even in some of these larger organizations, a 1% and 2% difference, that is massive. When you start getting into 10, that is monumental. And unfortunately, what happens is, from a grandeur and a marketing perspective, whether they're coaches or whether they're software companies or whatever, they'll say a 97% increase and, all that kind of stuff. And it becomes, a situation where people have significant doubt. So for me, your transparency and your discussion about that, to me, first of all, I appreciate. It is more realistic, but it is still yet quite significant.
It is, because, and here's what's interesting, so we could share all this, right? And in the book, we talk about this. People know this. We explain it to them. If you do these activities, okay, if you do them with greater consistency, greater frequency, your teams will produce and they'll grow at a faster rate. But yet 40% of the people won't change habits or behaviors. Even you can statistically show them, just listen, over time, I'm telling you, it works, but no, my old way is the way I do it.
Well, and that's where, the book goes into a lot of the different, frameworks and structures and, things in order to be able to help people to see, oh, well, it's not as difficult as I suspected. And I do now see a starting point and a journey involved with this, because development is just that. I mean, you and I had this discussion earlier talking about where we were and what we experienced and how that impacted us and what we chose to do about it. And, all of those things, it's a journey. But I think when you start, looking at some of these structures and frameworks to get us going, one of your foundational components and elements is something you call the growth rings. And again, you talk about that in the TED Talk, and we'll link to that on your show notes page. But at a high level, if you could, please help us understand what the growth rings are.
All right. So as I go through this, Jim, feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any time here and tell me to either shut up or go further down this road or just seriously, because I can go forever on this. So the growth rings they represent environments. And so there's 4 primary environments, and they represent environments that either promote or hinder growth of living things. Okay, so they represent environments that promote or hinder growth of living things. Now, environments, we'll talk about those for a second, are our perceived surroundings that shape living things. Okay, there are our perceived surroundings. Because what may be an environment to me may be a different environment to you. Okay. Then we step back away from that. And environments are created by our response to forces that exist in the world. And there are primary cultural forces, and there are physical forces, and there are social forces. And without going into great depth on all those, the obvious ones right now, for example, the pandemic is a physical force. How we respond to that pandemic creates our own environment. And that I'll get to in a minute what those 4 environments are. But so the forces are not, they are not environments of themselves. It is how we respond to them. So the pandemic, like I said, is an example of a physical force. A forest fire in a forest would be an example of a physical force in an environment that creates either within or creates an environment. Social forces are where we come in, Jim. It is the teachers, coaches, bosses, parents in our lives, and how we respond to our engagement and interactions with them also dictate our environments. Okay. Now, so let's take a step back from that. You're my boss, Jim, and how I and the others on my team respond to you, getting back to the growth rings, puts us in one of 4 environments. It can be either stagnation. Stagnation is a negative growth environment, as the word would depict, where there's too many steps and permissions and minutia, And we typically are growing, we're just going backwards. In a business perspective, you can see stagnation occur with high-tech companies. Think no further than like Compaq Computers, Kodak, Blockbuster, right? We're really tech dependent. And if we don't keep up or keep ahead of it, boy, we can go into stagnation in a hurry. Chaos is the antithesis of that. Chaos is having no idea what's coming and going. The pandemic has created a tremendous amount of chaos in people's lives right now from both a personal and a business perspective. We don't have any control. We don't know what's going to happen next, and we certainly don't know what the outcome is going to be. That's the second growth ring. The third one is what we call order. Order is knowing that what you do or what is happening around you leads to a predictable outcome. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Predictability is what creates comfort. Now I'll just let the listeners think about that for a second. When I know what the outcome's going to be, whether even it's good or bad, that's what creates comfort. And while order is part of a high growth, high performing teams, there is some order involved. We see it in our research. The challenge with order is because it creates comfort, it's where we want to be. That's our visceral responses to have these predictable outcomes and to be in a state of comfort. The challenge is we only grow in a state of discomfort. Discomfort is created by the fourth ring. It's the result of being in what's called a complex environment. Don't think of complexity as complicatedness. Just think of it as the name of an environment where now inputs have changed. And when inputs change, outcomes are unpredictable. And it's unpredictability that creates discomfort. So we'll just kind of noodle on that for a minute.
Well, as you're talking about that, and you explain it with a visual and everything, so it helps a lot of people kind of put these things in proper context. But you talk about those 4 primary themes, and then you break them out into 8 sub themes. And really what these do is enable us to focus where some of the order comes in, but then also gives us an understanding of, where we want to create some discomfort, because it shouldn't be a situation where we create discomfort in places where it's not going to add value to anyone, including the organization, customers, and so on and so forth. And so I think these subcategories are really important. And also I want you to talk about how these subcategories either get impacted from an evolutionary state, as well as from, increased information and data so that they have to be iterated. Okay. So these 4 sub themes are, you have overall coaching theme, which is overall coaching impact, and then coaching culture. And then you have relationship themes, which are relationship building and listening. And then you have order themes, which are coaching activity and coaching consistency. And then complexity themes, which are self-development and catalytic factor. Now, that's what's in the book. So even before we started our interview, you said, well, even from when we wrote the book, some of these things have changed because of the data that we're collecting and, things along those lines. But if you could, give us an understanding of, and you kind of did, you did a moment ago when you were explaining, give us an understanding of the order, how I need to focus, how I need to execute, how I need to get started, and how these things can iterate.
Okay. Wow. Great. You've done your due diligence, Jim. First of all, let me back up on this. So when we think about those 4 rings within the growth rings, and again, there's stagnation, order, complexity, and chaos. When we look at high growth, high performing teams, really 2 of them come into play that have to be there. Components of order and components of complexity. If there's stagnation or chaos involved, things are getting bad in your teams, okay? As leaders, as coaches, we control this. We have the greatest impact on that environment within our organization, okay? So within order, now, before I get there, there's one more primary theme. So the primary themes, when we look at high growth, high performing teams, there's an order theme, a complexity theme, and a relationship theme that you and I haven't even discussed yet. Of those three, they are inextricably linked, but yet what's foundational, the one that's most foundational is relationship. Without that in place, the other two fall apart. You cannot put in healthy order or healthy complexity. In other words, you can't put in great processes and systems, and you can't challenge people and make them uncomfortable without first having a trust-based relationship in place. So what you were already alluding to, Jim, is those three primary themes. We'll break them apart. First of all, relationship. There are two sub-themes under relationship. And I think you listed them. One was listening, and the other, what was the other? Trust.
We have relationship building. So yes,
relationship building, right? So yes, that's evolved even since the printing of this book. For example, listening used to be one. When we continue to look at data, listening is no longer having a very strong correlation to discretionary effort, to driving a stronger relationship, as weird as that may sound. But what we find that is replacing it, that has a stronger correlation, is psychological safety. So relationship now, we measure that by measuring the psychological safety a leader or coach brings to their teams, as well as their ability to, we use the term connect, create trust-based relationships. So those are the two themes that comprise relationship. Order, it is doing, the right activities at the right time and doing them consistently. Those are themes that are measurable within teams as well. And then when you look back at complexity, and this is one that surprised us most in our research. And we talk about this in the book. Early on, we figured that there needed to be trust and relationship involved. We knew that there were probably great systems and accountabilities and processes that great coaches and leaders had in place, but there was something else. And we kept investigating it. And then when we discovered it, we couldn't even figure out how to explain it. And that's how, quite frankly, the growth rings were developed. But it is my leader, my coach's ability to create healthy discomfort. And I use the qualifier healthy, Jim, because you can make me uncomfortable through fear. That is not healthy. I can grow. You can make me uncomfortable. I can still grow in fear, right? I'm just not going to do it with you for long. Turnover will eventually increase, right? My engagement will go down. So when we measure this within organizations, we're measuring a leader or coach's ability to develop your skills when whatever role you're in. And the only way we're going to develop them is by challenging you and making you uncomfortable, and by creating what we call catalytic events. That means I'm going to do something to disrupt, because when disruption occurs, growth should be the outcome of that if it's done well. So that's a long answer. I apologize, but those are kind of the themes. And the beautiful part about this is they're all measurable. People wonder, well, how do I know this? How do I know if I've got great leaders? How do I know if I've got great coaches? How do I know if I have great managers? And I hate that term. Measure it. You can quantify it now. So that's how it's done.
Well, and as you're talking, I start thinking about, going back to the conversation about, Taylorism, Frederick Taylor, when we first started looking at management and all that stuff. And you talked about the turn of the century, meaning the 19th. There's a significant shift that has happened because of the type of work that we are doing today, where the manager and the coach and the leader have to be the same person. It's no longer a situation of choice. It's a situation of necessity and essentialistic types of foundations in order for an organization to be not just thriving, but surviving. And so if I start thinking about going back to what you had mentioned, it's the frontline people are doing their work. It's a whole lot of chaos, a whole lot of disorder, and a whole lot of, things that are going on that are going to impact, the organization as a whole. And you have this middle group that is trying to sustain and maintain and put in process and all that. And you have these groups at the top which are also dealing with the chaos. So you got this wall, and you talked about them in a lot of different ways in regards to these constraints and all of that. How can we take, and I think the important point is what we're talking about here is how do we get the manager and the leader, and the coach to be the same person?
And that's, you're right. And that's a very poignant question. And that is, in essence, really what the book is all about. It's people need to behave when we go back and look at everything. People need to behave more like a high growth, high performing athletic coach than they need to be a business leader. And here's how we differentiate that. We believe great coaches have management skills. We believe great coaches have amazing leadership behaviors and traits. The difference where we separate this is I can be a follower. The way we view leadership, I can be a follower and be a great leader. I can have great leadership characteristics and great leadership traits. The only real gap between coaching and leadership is to coach, I got to have a team of people. A follower, can have great leadership traits. To be a coach, I got to have a team of people that reports to me. So that's our distinction. And we know in our research, people who do the right activities with the right frequency and the right quality can evolve from someone who just behaves more like a manager into a coach. Someone behaves more just like a leader, but into a coach. That if they really put their mind to it, our ability to evolve is limitless. It's just how much are we willing to do?
Well, and so you talk about, having coaching activities, you talk about meetings, you talk about one-on-ones, and you talk about team meetings, and you go into depth in those in the book. We don't have time to go into those, on the show. That's why people need to get the book. But one area of having those meetings that I think really impacts the whole quality element that you're kind of opening the door for is something you call tone. Now, we've all heard about tone, but in context of going from being, just that average to being a high performer, tell us a little bit about tone.
Sarah Worth in our company, our president, pays a lot of attention to this. I don't pay as much attention to it because I think naturally I seem to be better at it, but then I catch myself not doing it. So when we refer to tone, it's, are we being condescending? How are we communicating with our voice? How the questions we're asking, are we asking why questions versus how questions? And when you're in a coaching relationship, when you ask why versus how, now don't get me wrong, it's the opposite if we're talking strategically about a business. How or why questions are better than how questions. But one-on-one from a coaching relationship, if I ask you why, if that's the tone, whether I mean it or not, if that's the word I use, regardless of my tone, you're going to be on the defensive. So, if I were to say, Jim, look back on the year, why was it you handled this situation the way you did? All of a sudden now you're like, oh, I did something wrong, So why questions are an example of not just tone. And we need to approach people from the basis of a trust-based relationship. I'll use that term again. If I'm visiting with a friend, which is, now you're not going to be beer drinking buddies with everybody on your team. I understand that. But you need to be able to sit down with everybody and have a one-on-one conversation that is give and take, not top down. Everything culture starts top down, but it's only perpetuated bottom up. So I'm going to visit with you, Jim, not as your coach or your boss or your teacher or your mentor. I'm just going to have a conversation with you. And what's fascinating to me is, like, I'll sit down with our VP of sales. I learn as much from him in our one-on-ones as I'm confident he learns from me. Because I don't go in with an attitude and a tone of, I'm going to depart upon you all this amazing wisdom. I have the tone, I'm going to sit down and say, help me understand your week. Help me understand your last 2 weeks. And everything from what's happening at home to what's happening at work.
And really what you're talking about there is feedback. I mean, that is a feedback practice and activity that is a different behavior than using some of the, accusatory type of statements and the defensive types of statements. It's doing feedback better. And one of my mentors, Dr. Shay McConnon, talks about feedback, that it's one of the most vital yet lowest performing human development areas. So if we talk about, feedback, what do we need to do in order for feedback to be high performance?
That's a really powerful question. And let me affirm basically what you said. When we look at all the things that great coaches / leaders do, the one activity that has the highest correlation to creating discretionary effort from the people on your team is feedback. Next is one-on-ones, but first is feedback. So when we use that term, feedback really needs to be looked at in two different ways. Number one, it needs to be woven into the fabric of who you are and what you do. We're always providing feedback within our organization. We do the same thing with our clients. We help them understand that every single interaction and engagement you see from people on your team is an opportunity for feedback. And right now, within most organizations, feedback is viewed as something that happens only when something is done wrong. And that's that we first and foremost, we've got to get rid of it. Tom Osborne, the retired football coach at University of Nebraska, would always say, one of the most powerful things I do is I try and catch somebody doing something right. And then I tell them. And we miss that within business. I'm going to walk in somebody's office, so they look up at me. If their visceral instinct is, oh, Bill's in here, I did something wrong. That's bad, right? So feedback, good, bad, and indifferent. They use it in the world of sport. I could quote you all kinds of sports psychologists tell you it's the best thing they can do, right? And then here's the other part of it in business. When we look at results, leaders who provide objective feedback at least once a quarter are in the top 20%. At least once a quarter, I'm going to provide you objective feedback. Not just oral, not just, I'm talking on paper, in writing, whatever that may be, you're going to get it. In terms of, I say get it, not be in trouble, but get that written word.
Well, and as you're saying that, I even start thinking about it. Well, you go back to the relationship. There's two people involved with that. There's a coach and a coachee. And oftentimes what you'll find is everybody's bringing all of their previous experiences, who their previous leaders were, their previous cultures, all of that into, let's just say, a feedback or one-on-one session, or even a team, meeting for that matter. And so part of the responsibility here is also being a better coachee, at being engaged with the feedback process. And so oftentimes you'll find where you may be doing everything right. You have the right behaviors, you're asking the right questions, you're doing the best you possibly can in order to be able to create the relationship and build trust. However, you still have two people that are part of it, and you have essentially a coachee that's underdeveloped, doesn't know how to receive it. And also themselves, they don't know how to deliver it, because the feedback should go both ways, right? So what do we need to do in order to prepare coachees to be better coachees?
It first starts, I just got to take it back to ourselves. We own that as coach. Now, does that mean every coachee is coachable? No way, it doesn't. And there's all kinds of programs and occupational assistants, people that can help for those people. Sometimes they're just not worth having on your team. It's just, but everything begins with you. Have you created the relationship? Because here's what we know. You try and provide objective or even informal feedback to somebody that you haven't created a trust-based relationship with. You don't know what their goals are. You don't know what their strengths are. You don't know whether they're in a state of order or complexity. And now all of a sudden you're giving feedback. It's like, who are you? You don't know anything about me, and yet you're trying to provide me feedback. So it still begins with the coach.
Well, needless to say, for all of us, in order to be able to, really find a primary focus in all this, because, we're talking about creating some positive, disruption. We're talking about, focus and changing behaviors. We need inspiration. And one of the things that we look for on the show for inspiration are quotes. Do you have a favorite quote that you'd like to share?
Those evolve for me right now. The one I hang my hat on and that evokes emotion from me every time I hear it or see it is very simple. It's from Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning. And the quote is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." That right there, and probably because of where I'm at in life as well, Jim, it's a very powerful quote to me.
Yes, it's one that for myself, I have to try to remember my whole response, try to make gap where I need to make it, and try to teach my kids the same thing. Well, however, there's times when we don't do that, right? And even when we started talking about our past experiences and things like that, they formulate who we are, where we're going, and the actions we may take or may not.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about getting over the hump, so there's lessons that we've learned, and people can learn from those stories that we share. Is there a time where you've gotten over the hump that you can share?
It'll ruin the opening to the TED Talk, but for those who watch it, yes, I think really, again, it's an example of growth through discomfort. And you mentioned it when you were introducing me. In 2008, I was fired from my job. I'd never been fired at anything before, since getting kicked out of school in the 7th grade. I was terminated from my role. Just what I was told, it was a reorganization. But I went from, flying high to crashing and burning within minutes. And the fascinating part of that is, while it created chaos, in the short run, the chaos turned into complexity. The complexity turned into major growth. As a result of that, I started my own company. As a result of that, I was able to do a TED Talk. As a result of that, everything from that point on in my life changed. And while I thought right away it had changed for the worse, it didn't. It changed for the better. To the point where, Jim, I can quite literally say you and I wouldn't be on this podcast right now had I not been fired back in 2008. Unpredictable outcomes.
That's and it's at the time when you're immersed in it, it doesn't seem that way. The wisdom that comes later, will help you to find, peace and resolve, and also take a better path, right? So when I start looking at the book, when I start talking to you, I start thinking about, talk about even your volunteer work. There's goals that I know you have and that you set. Is there one goal that you can share with us?
That's yet to happen.
Absolutely.
I can't, it's interesting. About a year and a half ago, I said, I don't think I'll ever get out of this business until we start an athletic arm. Because we had all we had done is work in the business sector. And just by even no planning on our own, we were pulled into athletics. So that's one of those recent ones. Right now, we recently pulled into education. So while in business, we're measuring the impact leaders and coaches have on the performance of teams, and we measure and quantify it and help them understand what to do and how to do it better. We brought that to athletics, and people said, hey, measure the impact coaches are having on student athletes. That's what we were doing. And then recently, education, a superintendent, very forward-looking superintendent, approached us and said, I want it for my teachers. I want to know, and I want my teachers to know the impact they're having on students in the classroom. And if we can help them have more positive impact on students, we can change the world. So that's our newest venture right now, is we're working in that, and where that leads, I don't know, but I tell you what, nothing is more profound. Don't get me wrong, I love working in business. I love the way business leaders think and the way they move and act. But man, working with students, I don't know, there's just something way more organic about that, Jim. It just feels real good.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement, along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Bill, the Hump Day Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Bill Eckstrom, are you ready to hoe down?
Okay, baby, let's go. I don't know where this is going, but let's have some fun.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
My mind.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Meditate.
And what is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
My ability to identify and acquire amazing talent.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Best tool, my family.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to The Coaching Effect on your show notes page as well.
Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Bill Eckstrom. And Eckstrom is ECKSTROM. Okay, Bill, this is my last Hump Day Hoedown question. Imagine you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back to the age of 25. But you can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why? What I would take back with me is I would become more comfortable with discomfort. The why behind that is pretty simple. Growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. So learning to accept discomfort when needed and appropriate, and recognize and acknowledge it for what it is, would have created that much more growth in my life from an early age. Bill, I had fun with you today. How can the Fast Leader Legion get in touch with you?
Thank you for that opportunity, Jim. Our company is Excel Institute, which is spelled ECSELL, excelinstitute.com. There's BillEckstrom.com as well, site. I am on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I don't do Facebook. I'm on those three. And I always respond. If someone wants to reach out to me directly, following the TED Talk, I've had hundreds and hundreds of people reach out to me personally and ask me questions or want to engage. And I have with every single one, with the exception of one creepy person. But so if somebody wants to reach out and ask me a question or engage, I will do it.
All but the creepy people.
Yeah, you bet. I won't go into details.
Eckstrom, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.